Ladies and gentlemen, we are live, as this is the main event you've all been waiting for. Brought to you by Exonius, the cybersecurity asset management company. It's time!
Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Coffee with Ashish for Cloud Security Podcast. So today we're talking about challenges on building serverless application at scale. If you are new here, welcome. And if you have been here before, welcome as well. We normally have these live stream every weekend on our Cloud Security Podcast YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter channel. And we normally, after the live is over, you would find chapters at the bottom for you can go straight to the question that we've asked to the guest. Now, as I mentioned, today's topic is an interesting one as well, because a lot of people have a misconception that they build applications serverless is usually a worker function. So let me bring my friend on and let's get into how interesting life can be with a serverless application. So I've got my music queued in over here. Let's get into that. Hey, welcome, Ran. How's it going, man?
Very great. How are you doing, Ashish?
Good. I've got a few people coming in as well. Hey, Vinny, thanks for coming in, man. So it's always good to kind of get into the video things, but I do want to say thank you. It's morning, so thank you for coming in, and cheers, man. For what are you having? I'm having coffee. What are you having?
So a mint tea. I'm a tea person.
Oh, you're a tea person. Oh, good to know, man. Mint tea is great as well. So
yeah,
I appreciate you coming in. For people who may not know a bit about you, love to know. I know a bit about you. I've been researching you for some time, and I've been having a conversation with you as well. I've got a few more. Wow, it's like morning from sleepy London. Had to wake up to listen. Thanks, Martinez. It's like 4 a.m. for Martinez in the UK. Oh my God, thanks for coming in, man. Really appreciate this. So for people who may not know you, Ran, what's your background as to how you got to where you are today, like co-founding company and everything? So what was your way into technology and serverless?
Yeah, so probably it's the same spiel as everyone is doing. You know, from the early days, I liked computers. I build and disassemble them. I love video games. I loved, hacking stuff. So really starting with the early days, but then the professional career started somewhere along, the IDF. By the way, let me introduce myself before saying what's my professional career. I'm Ran. I'm based out of Tel Aviv, Israel. So right now for me, it's 8 a.m. in the morning. So really great time for, catching up coffee or tea.
Yeah, perfect.
And as everybody in Israel, I recruited to the army, and there I did focus mainly on cybersecurity. So my background actually comes from security part. Anywhere, from development to designing, to leading teams, to leading projects. Really long time, serving there. Really cool stuff. Whatever you hear on the news where it happens, it's like, it's very interesting. And when I got out, it was relatively obvious for me that I want to build something big. And when you're looking at my background, it's mostly R&D, low-level, cybersecurity, cloud, infrastructure, and it made a lot of sense to me to focus on, the things that we as developers, DevOps, engineers are experiencing on the day-to-day. So it was clear to me that I need to look for the new technology in the playground, what people are speaking about. And I'll start, with the Alexa skill, what brought me into serverless afterwards, but that's kind of the long story short. Today, after 3.5 years of Hexagon, jumping to the end of the serverless story, our company got acquired by Cisco for lots of money, so that's a great accomplishment. And now we're building full stack observability within Cisco, like the broadest offering, the biggest offering, but that's kind of what I'm starting today.
Yeah, perfect. And it's really interesting. So Alexa got you into serverless. That's an interesting one there. Definitely something to explore in a later bit. But so I feel like serverless is one of those topics where a lot of people feel because they have a couple of worker functions running, hey, I'm serverless, but a lot of companies now, they have represented themselves as serverless conf, and a lot of other places, they're building products in serverless, right? Like the large scale. I'm curious from your side as to what do you see as some of the common use cases where people use serverless, considering, I guess you're in that serverless land now. For people who may not have heard, I mean, they've heard of serverless, but they don't know what many people use them for. What are some of the examples that people use them for?
Yeah. So the most straightforward example and the easiest to start is a cron job, something that starts every minute, hour, day, whatever makes sense to you, to do some housekeeping stuff, like renew certificates, shutting down instances that are unused, all these common use cases where you need to do them, or even processing, batch processing, like every day, wake up and process all of the remaining files on my object storage. This is kind of the first way to start with serverless. I wouldn't call it production serverless. I would just say, this is the easiest and most straightforward case. And then you're starting with more advanced use cases, more native serverless use cases. So when you're thinking of serverless, it's mostly event-driven architecture. You don't want to have something that runs on a while true or a web framework that just, always on. You want to react into some event, whether it's a message, a change somewhere, an HTTP call, WebSocket, whatever that makes sense to you. So then, moving to the more advanced use cases, probably a backend API would be a really great example. Something that gets an HTTP call from any type of API gateway or load balancer or any other service, process it and returns the response. We can think of more sophisticated things like data pipelines. So I'm having a new message coming in from, my Kafka, my queuing system, my topics. So I want to process them and do something, store them on the database, call third-party APIs, etc. And then basically from that point, anything that you want to build, it can be as complex as needed. In our, in our infrastructure, we got thousands of Lambda functions running in production, so it can get as complex as you can think of. But I would say these are the most common use cases. And, there are cases like IoT, Alexa, which we mentioned, and basically any other thing.
Right. And so, because quite a few use cases that are already sounds like this in the wild, and I'm sure that comes with different kinds of maturity as well. And now, kind of like coming from a building perspective, and we're talking about so many use cases that are probably available already, what are some of the challenges that you see people have when trying to build an event-based architecture-driven serverless? And maybe touching on what is eventless as well, because a lot of people won't even know what that is.
Yeah. So, programmatically, if I'll step back, maybe 15 or 20 years, there's been the people that, or the engineers that knew what event-driven is, but the programming that we did was more simple, in an essence of a while true or like a framework that already is doing for us whatever we need. We didn't thought about messaging, about asynchronous handling. It was more simple and it was good. But then, software evolved and we needed something that can, for example, process your data, but wouldn't stale you. Like, let's say I'm uploading profile pictures and I need to analyze them to detect your face and your eyes and whatever needs to happen. I don't want to block you while you're uploading your new profile picture until everything is being processed. So I'll get your profile picture. I'll tell someone, hey, go ahead and handle this new profile picture, understand where the eyes, understand the face, understand, for whatever reasons that we need it, and reply immediately to Ashish, your profile has been updated. Success. Go ahead and continue what you're doing. We'll take care for the rest of the things in the backend. So that's the part where you're sending a message and somebody needs to receive it. This is exactly the event-driven architecture. I'm a service that I'm responsible to react whenever there is a new event. And there are lots of ways to pass synchronous and asynchronous events through HTTP, through gRPC, through sockets, through messages, message queues or topics. And that's what starts event-driven architecture. And then the complexity of it is to start and think this way, because we're used to pack all of the logic into one component. There's no events necessarily, just one function calls the others, like real code function, not function of a service, and it's not really event-driven. And then you need to break it up. And how do you start to transmit messages? How do you make sure they're reliable? How do you make sure what's the performance from end to end? It starts to introduce, when your software turns from one piece into hundreds of pieces, It just creates more complexities and more challenges in general.
Is that where people tend to say, oh, when you start doing serverless, you land on the whole, there's so many lambdas. Like, they talk about like thousands of lambdas. I think I was talking to a company once, and they said on an average, they reckon they have at least 1 million lambdas running just like wildly that they have no control over, or at least that's what they've felt, or at least from the outside. So what you're touching on is something really interesting. It's an event-driven architecture, which is kind of helps you scale based on, say, an action which could be an upload of a picture, but that could have a lot of things running in the parallel or maybe at different scale. So what do you see as some of the challenges that at such a scale brings in for building serverless applications?
So what you mentioned with thousands or tens of thousands of functions, the first issue is just understanding what happens. Like I would say the most basic resource management or inventory management. Which function do I have? What they're responsible for? What's their triggers? How many times are they running? What's their cost? Function as a service introduces new billing model. How much does it cost? Can I block it if it costs too much? So just understanding, mapping all of the functions and the resources, this is probably the first and foremost challenge. And it happens just because it's so easy to spin up new resources, with all of the infrastructure as a code. And now that with serverless, you don't need to ask, the IT department, can you buy me a new Dell or IBM server? It just like, I'm clicking a button or I'm just typing a command and I have a new server somewhere. So this is probably the first and foremost challenge.
Interesting. So, all right, I've built an architecture. I don't know my inventory. I'm kind of scared at that point. Fair enough. And so are there security challenges with this as well that kind of come to your mind at that point? I mean, clearly billing, if you lose billing, you can't block stuff. Sounds like there's a few security challenges as well.
Yeah, so I'd say the easiest, like the most straightforward challenges of security with serverless is one, understanding what resources do we have and what their access that they're having. Unfortunately or luckily, it's really easy to set up a new service, but then unfortunately, if you misconfigure it with the incorrect permissions, you're ending up with maybe, 1,000 functions that can do anything to your NoSQL database. It's not something that probably you would like to happen. So this kind of trivial mapping of, this is what it's allowed and this is what it isn't allowed, and make sure you don't have like a wildcard permission. It's something important. And then just understand the entry vectors. As a security person, you need to understand where you can come in and out. And it used to be one single point where you could come in. So you would install WAF and, runtime security and things like that. But now you have thousands of ways in. Each one is different because this one is from a message. This one is from an HTTP call. This one is gRPC. This one is a WebSocket. This one is a cron job. You have so many inputs, so many differences. It's so big. It's really like, where do I even start?
Well, that's a good question. Where do I really start? So where do people normally start with serverless? Is the inventory the first step?
I think so. In general, both for security, for monitoring, for observability, for anything, I would start with, first understanding what assets do we have, how are they configured, what's their, KPIs, like how many invocations, how many permissions they have. So just start with the basic mapping. This is probably the first thing to start with.
Right. Okay. And it's really easier said than done as well, because clearly, as you mentioned, there's only so many trigger points for how many Lambda functions or maybe serverless functions in general would be running. But to your point, is there are there different types to this? Because I feel like there's like an internet-facing one, non-internet, private ones, public ones. I'm sure that adds even more complexity to this kind of space as well, right?
Yeah, so also just as regular software, there you have what's your kind of a outer layer, which communicates back and forth to the world. It can be like HTTP endpoints, it can be REST, GraphQL endpoints, etc. And then you have the internal things, and they should communicate somehow through a VPC, through some other configuration. And that's another thing, both on the security side and on the monitoring side, to understand how pieces are communicating together from the outer piece all the way to the inner core business logic.
Oh, and to your point, inner core also has its challenges where you can pick any language you want these days. You can do Python, Node.js, you can go anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
There's another complexity underneath that.
We're seeing customers using literally 3 or 4 languages on their Lambda functions, or functions just similar as a code. They have some Go, they have some Python. Actually, yes, we have, I think, 2 or 3 languages, programming languages on our serverless functions, because it's so easy, and you can decouple the teams from each other. If one team chooses Node because they know Node better, why should the other team do so if their strength is Python? Go ahead and do Python. The interconnectivity is what matters, like the how services are communicating to one another, not what each service is doing, solely.
Actually, that's interesting. How do people? I mean, I'm sure if you're seeing this as a customer as well, and I see these challenges in the security space quite often, where across the organization in general, this is pre-serverless. We're not even talking just serverless.
Yeah.
There's people were using different languages, right? Getting a head around, yeah, we have a team that uses Node.js, another team that uses Java, another team that uses .NET, and it's like, to your point, how do people normally start even addressing that? Is that like, because I normally feel like people normal reaction would be, I'm going to have a standard. We only work with Node.js and .NET, nothing else. Is that how people deal with this?
So I don't think having different programming languages is the problem per se. It's more about how do you standardize what you're doing with it, because you have some security tools that may be native to some programming languages, and you might use one vendor to monitor Python and the other vendor to monitor Go because they don't do this, and then you end up with I'm using solution X and Y for monitoring, solution A and B for security, and they're not communicating to one another. So I'll have another solution for logging, like Elastic or Splunk, and on top of that, I'll have another Grafana or Kibana. Or you end up with a suite of tools that not necessarily correlate to one another, and that's another challenge. When your infrastructure is not unified, it might imply that your second level, your solutions on top of it, will not be unified. Luckily today, I think the world is evolved. You have cross solutions that speaks all languages, all infrastructures, so it becomes a bit easier. But again, I don't think having different languages is the problem per se. It's more about how do you unify what the outcomes of it.
Actually, that's an interesting point, because to your point about interconnectivity between services, if there's a team providing services, I'm going to use the example that you gave earlier, upload photo, and the other service is just to save the photo under your profile, it doesn't really matter what the language is. As long as they can communicate that over API, it shouldn't really matter. Like, I think the complexity may come in from a perspective, I guess, in terms of hiring, skill set and all that. That's secondary to what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's definitely more on the hiring challenge. And in general, hiring becomes really hard nowadays, but it's more of a hiring challenge. Let's say you have, I don't know, .NET, and it's not probably easy to get .NET developers as it's easy to get Node developers, and it's a problem. It's more problem than dealing and developing with .NET.
Yeah, I have my own stories about .NET, which I'll hold off for the moment. But we did spoke about monitoring as well. So I'm curious now. We kind of spoke about challenges where we're starting to build an event-driven architecture, have a lot of these serverless applications running. Now, from a monitoring and performance perspective, sounds like there's already quite a few challenges with different languages. Asset inventory is probably another one as well. How do you normally see companies do monitoring and performance? I'm assuming there's kind of like there's a minimum viable product to do monitoring versus like I'm super advanced level monitoring. So what does that monitoring performance look like in the serverless land?
Yeah, so the easiest thing to start with, and that's the basic type of monitoring that everybody gets, is logs. Everybody are used to logs. Ship your logs to whatever your cloud offers, or some general solution like Elastic, Splunk, or any kind of form out of it, and just monitor logs. You can start to set up metrics. You can set alerts when something bad happens, and you'll get to the logs. And that's relatively the easiest solution to start with. It do require some maintenance and overhead. And now you obviously let's say we're picking Elastic. It's open source. People think it's free. But okay, then there is the hosting of Elastic and the maintenance, and somebody should know Elastic in order to set up Elastic. It's not like a click and okay, we got Elastic, we got monitoring. And then the second part, which is more harder, is actually to ship interesting logs, because you don't want to have raw logs like a line of log that you need to parse out like a grok or something like that. You want to have a JSON with context and metadata and the payload and the details and everything comes in and out, and then you need to create middlewares in your code for everything basically that you do, for every API call, for every incoming call, for every message. So generating the logs is probably the hardest part, and not just clicking on some button to spin a new Elastic search.
So is logging readily available in serverless functions? I mean, I know there are different types of it. Like, how good is the logging which is out of the box from serverless functions?
It's the most basic thing. I'll take, for example, AWS. With AWS, you get decent metrics. How many invocations, how many errors, what's the average, what's the duration, average percentiles, etc. And you get the most basic form of logs, like start, end, and then you can print your own logs. But again, if you're just printing logs, if they're not structured well, it's hard to make sense out of them. There are lots of other problems that I'll address soon, but you need to create your own logs. Nobody will create the logs that you need. And then what the nightmare part is, we're having a problem. Oh, we didn't print the log before that line, so we now need to add this log line, push it to GitHub, redeploy, wait for the problem to happen again, and it's like the log is not there. You can't troubleshoot it if you don't have logs.
No, and to your point, is troubleshooting, I've always heard this, and keen to know your thoughts on this as well. Is troubleshooting quite hard in a serverless land? Because how sometimes people say, oh, like the compliance requirement sometimes is, hey, you should have, I don't know, some kind of an agent running or antivirus or whatever. But that kind of concept doesn't exist in serverless. And another thing, well, that's the security side. The other side to running as a compute in general is that logging and troubleshooting because there is a certain time period that the function runs for. If you don't have logging, you have no idea what happened until you keep running it again and again. So how do people deal with that kind of a thing?
Yeah. So basically within that nature, it's not like an instance that you can connect and gather some more information. You don't have any instance or SSH to do so. So it becomes harder, definitely harder to tackle. But the main problem, I think, with serverless is that when you had just one component, it was easy to investigate, because that's kind of a star architecture diagram. You have the centralized piece. You can see from there all the communications to where it communicates. And with serverless, if it's built correctly, you don't have a star. It's more of a pipelines, lots of pipelines. Services are communicating to one another. So not necessarily if this Lambda fails, it doesn't mean that this is the problematic Lambda. Maybe the Lambda before that, which pushed an incorrect message, which caused this function to fail. So understanding the context of a flow in such an environment, this is really the problem. And this is really where logs are not addressing the problems, because you'll have these logs, you'll have this and that logs, but they're not printed all together. They're not printed like in line one after the other. It's you have this one, you need to correlate them somehow and say, okay, this is the message that correlates to this message, and this is the problem. And it doesn't come this way. You have like two different streams, STD out to two different outputs, and now you need to match them, because it's the problem is not when you're having just a single message. When you're having 1,000 of messages per second here and the same here, you wouldn't be able to to match these logs here and there.
Wow. Okay. So sounds like it's not easy, clearly, building applications in serverless. I mean, there are clearly a lot of use cases as well. But so why do people jump into the serverless thing in the first place? Because I mean, to your point, it's sounds very complex as well. For someone who's listening to both of us talk about this, going, yeah, I heard Ran talk about this, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so complex. So why do people jump into this? Like, I feel like it's one of those things which is probably going to be like you would see a lot more of in 2022, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. But why people are jumping into this, and do you think this is going in 2022? This is going to be a lot more prolific?
Yeah, the reason that people are jumping to it has a lot of different values. I'm putting the the title of the show is the challenges, not the benefits, but let's pause a bit and talk about the benefits of serverless. If you ever had to set up like a web server, let's say 15 or 20 years ago, I used to do that. Okay, let's say you need to contact IT to get a new server. Then you need to install it on some rack, plug in, power adapters, network adapters, put in a CD of your favorite Linux OS or Windows if you prefer to, install that, start to configure the operating system, make sure it got DHCP or a static IP, etc. Then you need to install all of the packages that you need. If it's Python, pip install Python, like get Python, pip, install of the dependencies, ship your software to this server. Then let's say I'm using Flask. My favorite framework is Flask. I'm running Flask, but that's not alone. I need to do a reverse proxy like Nginx, and maybe high availability proxy, and making sure everything works together. And this is just for a single instance. What happens when I need multiple instances? Same goes over again. And now I need a load balancer before them that will shift the traffic. That's also a nightmare. Look how much time it took me. It's probably, let's say a day per server to get it up and running. And with serverless, it's literally, let's say if you're very professional, it will take you probably a minute. If it's the first time you're building it, it will take you probably like 30 minutes to get up and running with unlimited scale and no kind of, messing around, maintenance, patching the operating system, so many things that are unrelated to what you really want to do. You want to focus on the business and not the other parts. So that's probably the best benefit of serverless. Do what you want to do, focus on your business logic, and don't focus on infrastructure, don't focus on scale. This will be taken care for you.
Interesting. So maybe that's a good segue into the whole land of what does maturity scale look like for people who are probably looking at serverless right now for doing, what we said earlier, doing background jobs for, hey, make sure all the files are being backed up and synced into S3 bucket. This could be a random example, but all the way to people like yourself who are building companies on serverless completely. So how does that maturity scale look like between the two kind of, for people who may be on the one spectrum and the beginning spectrum and trying to get to the spectrum where, hey, I would love to have a product which is completely serverless. What does that really look like from a maturity perspective?
So I think over the years, if I recall correctly, Lambda started at 2016 or 2017, somewhere between these years. Back then it was completely, background jobs, etc. And it started to grow more and more traffic. I think today serverless is something that, let's say almost every engineer heard of it, not necessarily messed with it, but heard of it. And I think over the time, it will be more and more common use cases. It wouldn't replace all other use cases or all other environments. It will be just another framework, another tool that you can use if that makes sense to the organization and to the project that you need to build. And I think moving forward from the, I'm a beginner with serverless, and in general, the company or the organization that you work for, we're starting with serverless to something more mature, is where's serverless placed in your architecture? If it's a background job, it's not, let's put it other way. I love to call it is it important to you? So if it drops, will you wake up at 4 a.m.? So probably if you're backing up files, no, it's like, I'll go tomorrow and I'll make sure, manually back up these files. But if your, API drops, you'll wake up at any time to do that. If your data pipeline stops processing and there's no data for customers, you'll wake up to do that. So the more important is to your organization, this is how far you advance with serverless. And it's not necessarily, many people would say the number of functions you have, the number of scale running through your system. I think these are byproducts to, the company, the organization, the progress that you're making with serverless. But initially, it's, how important is what you're building with serverless.
Yep. And I think to your point, the maturity of scale also flows from the fact that the stuff that serverless function is doing, if that's really critical, to your point, you will wake up at 4 a.m. for that. That means you're a serverless running company, I guess, at that point. Yeah. Your livelihood depends on the fact that your functions are responding correctly.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's a great example, man. I'm actually gonna use that for some of the next time I have this conversation. So we've been talking about the whole building serverless application and like the challenges that come with building application as well. Now, is there I feel like there's not enough information about serverless and what it looks like from an architecture perspective. Where do you normally send people for learning a lot more about, say, building serverless applications outside of the whole, hey, go to your specific cloud provider thing? Is there any other resources that you normally send people to? Like, hey, go here and learn about serverless.
Yeah. So there are a lot of people that would love to help, including me, for example. I'm an AWS serverless hero, and I'm happy to help,
Oh, perfect. I know that, but I'm glad I'm the company of a serverless hero.
Yeah. So I really love helping. Any question regarding architecture, regarding solutions, regarding use cases, I'm happy to help. And just as me, there are a lot of heroes or MVPs. Each cloud vendor name it differently. So this is one piece to start. Then, any online courses. At this point, there's probably an online serverless course at every e-learning website. I don't want to mention names, but people have their own preferred kind of website.
Sure. Yep.
And if not, ask friends. If you don't do serverless, you probably know a friend that is doing serverless. Here, it's a really question of experience. Someone that is doing serverless for 3 years would be able to give you really great advice on, what to do, what to tackle first, etc. So it really depends on the use case. I can't say something that is generically applied to every serverless use case. It's, if you ask me, hey, Ran, I'm planning to build this and I need to deliver this by this time. What do you suggest to do? This is one answer, but it wouldn't apply for someone that is saying, I'm building another stuff, which will take me, 4 years to build. How do you suggest to build it? So really try to use any help out there. And there are a lot of, if you want to get in the know of serverless and, type of the newsletters that are coming across the globe. So, there are, one of my most recommended ones is Jeremy Daly's one. I can post it to you so you can share it with the people. Great newsletter, off by none. It's the name of the newsletter. Really great articles, really great summarization of the content. It's not like just, here are links, go and read them. It's like, what's Jeremy's daily takes on each and every point. So it's really nice, and it collects data from, the social media, from content like blog posts, from new releases from different products, and events. So it's really nice.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely pass it on. Just got a comment from Zenith here. So, no, Zenith, we're not running a secret episode, but appreciate you waking up at 12:30 in the middle of the night for this. Really, thank you for that, for waking up so late for this. So, that's kind of like most of the questions that I had. Now, I've got fun questions for people to kind of get to know a bit more about Ran as well. And these are just 3 questions, not too many, right? Just to get to know you a bit more, so audience get to connect with you. The first question is, what do you spend most time on when you're not working on serverless?
Walking and cooking. These are my
walking and cooking.
Things. Yeah, I really like walking. I'm walking. Yesterday I got to know that I'm walking 100,000 steps per week.
Really?
Which is a lot. The average person walks like 10,000, 20,000 steps per week. So I'm really a walker. I'm walking all the way to the office, which is like 45 minutes every day, back and forth. I like to take walks to think, to speak, to chat. I'm a fan of it. It's when you're running and you're releasing, I think the dopamine hormone, which will make you kind of relaxed and happy. This is what happens after I'm walking.
Wait, are you one of those people who has a treadmill in their house when they're doing a meeting? Just keep walking in the treadmill while doing a meeting. Have you seen those?
Exactly, back and forth, from one room to the other, speaking.
Yeah.
It makes me think. It makes me, process.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough. I'll say I'm going to take a second for the fun section, because I've got a question here from Vineet as well, which is maybe an interesting one. His question is, what are the challenges when you move your serverless application from one cloud provider to another?
Oh, that's hard. Serverless, among of the challenges are vendor lock-in. When you're using serverless, the problem is that not just the code. So you're forced to work in a certain framework that the cloud vendor is providing you, getting the event, getting the context, returning the response in a specific schema. And then this is not only the part. When you're doing serverless, you're probably tied to other services. I'll say, for example, from AWS, you're having API Gateway and DynamoDB and SNS and SQS, which are not vendor agnostic at all. And not only that, you're using their own code. Like literally the code of putting a message and getting a message from SQS or SNS, it's an AWS specific. So moving from one vendor to the other, it's very, very hard, especially when you're running fully serverless. I would consider, I would go back with a question. Why do you want to migrate from one cloud to the other? If it's cost, it will cost you a lot to migrate from one cloud provider to the other. And you really need to think out for the long term whether it's worth it, because on the short term, it will definitely cost more. But if it's a kind of a my big company, thousands of people company are planning to migrate from one cloud vendor to the other as a big project, the CFO is leading it. So, okay, it probably makes sense. But if it just, I'm having an application that costs $100 a month and I want to switch to another vendor because it will cost me, I don't know, $60 a month, that's probably not the change that's worth it. But then again, it's hard. It's the challenge itself is just change, like change code from one architecture, from one tool sets or code sets to another thing.
Right. And would you say also the fact that to what you said about migration, the API calls are very cloud specific, but the logic, because the way I was thinking about this, it's like driving, whether you're driving a left-hand drive versus a right-hand drive, it's the same outcome, but it's very different. Like you kind of have to change your thinking altogether. Yeah, mindset, exactly. So like if you're in Azure, there's a very different way of doing serverless compared to how you would do it in AWS. And the serverless functions may look similar from the outside. Like the car looks exactly the same from outside. Unless you get in and start driving, oh, wow, this is very different. I'm not used to right-hand drive or left-hand drive or whatever. I feel like it's kind of one of those ones. Do you really want to switch is kind of the question you would ask. But that's a great question then.
Exactly. Then in this real example, from AWS to Azure, S3 buckets and blob storage doesn't work the same way. Cosmos DB and DynamoDB doesn't work the same way. Event Grid or Event Hub and SNS doesn't work the same way. The serverless functions, the signatures themselves doesn't work the same way. So it's it feels the same from the outside. It's serverless, it's function as a service, it's NoSQL databases, API gateways, etc. But as you mentioned, on the interior, it's completely different. And now, how do I change my whole home? From the outside, it looks the same, but from the inside, everything is different. So I need to have colors and I need to have different appliances and different furniture and different everything. It takes time.
Yeah. And it's a great question as well, Benny. Thanks so much for this, man. Hopefully we answered your question. Cool. All right, I just want to make sure we answer all the questions. So going back to the fun section again, switching our mind back to the fun question. The second question that I have is, what is something that you're proud of but is not on your social media?
I think the Alexa part that I've mentioned before.
All right. Okay. You didn't go into the story. So what's the Alexa story?
Yeah. It was 2016 or 2015. I visited the US, and I think it's the first time that the Alexa Echo Dot released.
Okay.
Back then there was a different Alexa, but then they released the Echo Dot and also started to release a framework to develop for it. And as a hacker, I fell in love with the concept that I can speak to something and it will do whatever I want. It's like, I'm thinking more of, how to automate APIs. Like I'm getting every morning to see, for example, when the bus is coming. Why shouldn't I ask, hey, Alexa, when the bus is coming? Or I don't know, I had a lot of use cases.
Or buying something on Amazon or getting something delivered. There's so many use. It's funny because we started a second podcast called Cloud Security News, and that was actually inspired by Alexa. Because my wife and I every morning would just tell Alexa, "Hey, what's the news today?" So it will just go into this like a less than 5 minutes version of what the news so far was from yesterday. Like, why isn't there like a cloud security version for this? So we made the Alexa version for cloud security news now. So exact, and that it was all triggered by Alexa. But I think the whole concept that you just say something and it happens.
Exactly. And when you, as an engineer, you can build your own things to say what you want and do whatever you want it to do. It's magnificent. So long story short, I bought this Alexa. I fell in love with serverless. I had a skill of ambient sound, like let's say a beach ambient sound, or a rainforest, or whatever, which is nice to hear and relaxing. It got to hundreds of thousands of invocations a day.
Really?
Back then, I built software with scale, but it wasn't as easy as that. I literally just deployed my function, and it's running with unlimited scale. I said, what the heck? Like, how did I get to this point? When I did this last time, it was a team of 20 engineers. We needed to run a lot of infrastructure, and now just that. So I really fell in love with that. And that got me into serverless and Hexagon, and the old story of me.
Yeah, awesome. No, thanks for sharing that, man. So it's a great story as well, because I think it's funny how technology has touched a lot of people, and how, I guess Hexagon is obviously an example of it now for you personally, and cloud security news for me personally, how the one thing has changed our life as well. But last question, what's your favorite cuisine or restaurant that you can share? Like, since you're in cooking, it's probably a perfect question for you. What's your favorite cuisine or restaurant?
I think I'll go with something really traditional, the Italian cuisine.
Right.
I love the Italian cuisine, but the not fancy one. I love the really original Italian. I forgot what the name in Italian for a restaurant.
It's not like pasta or linguine or spaghetti, none of those.
Exactly, but the real Italian great trattoria, like the real Italian great trattoria, it's like a family place that hosts you, and it uses really the greatest materials. It's not fancy. They're not trying to do some fusion food, etc. It's like the best wheat that makes the pasta, the best cheese that they got to make the sauce, the best tomatoes, the best basil. And when it's really done right, cooked right, simple. It's really simple food. When it gets more simple, it gets more delicious. So this is a kind of thing I love.
I think since you mentioned it, sometimes simple food is the best as well. But we kind of seek like some kind of experience when we're trying to eat food. Like there should be like 25 different flavors in your mouth. But sometimes it's like, I think a friend of mine, she's Italian actually. She talks about the fact that she just loves regular pasta with butter. That's like as simple as that. Like great pasta made at home, and she loves that. She would just cook that with butter, and that was it. So I love that.
So I really love a similar pasta. It's named cacio e pepe.
Cacio e pepe, okay.
Cacio is cheese, pepe is pepper, and that basically it's pasta, cheese and butter, and pepper, like a ground pepper.
That's it. That's right.
And it's delightful. It's like it's so tasty. It's so flavorful. Yeah.
I'm gonna try that tonight. Then I'm gonna try it tonight. You inspired me, Ran. But this is a great episode, man. I'm so glad you kind of took out the time for this as well. I think everyone else enjoyed it as well. Thanks for coming in, Martinez, and thanks for this, Vineet, and for staying up late as well, Zenith. Appreciate 12:30 a.m. as well. So. For where can people find you? Obviously, I'm sure people would have serverless questions after this as well. And you being a serverless hero, I'm sure you can come to their rescue. Where can people find you to be rescued by you for a serverless question?
So the best places would be LinkedIn and Twitter. On LinkedIn, just search for my name. Also on Twitter, but also Ran Rib. By the way, we just announced that Hexagon is going for free for everyone. So if you're looking for observability, as part of the acquisition, we managed to get it, literally free. You get all the Hexagon offering for free. So if you're having any monitoring questions or observability, there you'll get like a real answer, a real solution for free.
Oh, I'm gonna put a link for that as well. So there you go. You guys are already like a serverless hero, making things free for everyone to use as well. There you go. Hero saved the day. But awesome, man. I appreciate that. I'll leave the links for your LinkedIn and Twitter on the show notes as well. But thanks everyone for coming in. And I will see you all in the next episode on next weekend. And I'll see you soon, Ran. But thanks so much for coming in, man. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Peace.
Thanks.